Okay, so yes, I wrote this book, Creating a Life Together, which is about how to start a successful new intentional community. When I started it, I think I must have been like a surfer who happened to luckily catch a wave that was going to shore about people's interest in, well, how do you start one of those anyway? And I took it from what people were doing in real communities that I could find, what they were doing that was working successfully. I didn't ask them, what do you think? What are your theories? I asked them, what do you do? I also said, what did you do that didn't work? I also interviewed the founders of various failed communities, especially ones that had failed spectacularly. And there were 90% of the ones that had failed and 10% of the ones that had succeeded, from what I could tell. In my informal research in Colorado, looking up Colorado and then the Southwest and then the U.S. in the 1990s, and I found 90% failed and 10% succeeded. And I thought, oh my gosh, somebody ought to write this down. And you know how that is when you say that and the universe is listening? So now this book has been translated into 6 languages, including Russian and Korean, which tells me that was the right wave. I was on the right surfboard, and there's definitely an interest in this worldwide. So I'm interested in EcoVillages worldwide. And so this slideshow is to show you what they are and how they benefit the wider culture in their various areas. So we're going to go through this pretty quickly so that you can see the images and get some inspiration, and then we'll have some schmoozing and talking and questions and answers and your comments and insights afterward. So, 3 things that EcoVillages hope to do. Learn and practice and share with others ecological sustainability, economic, social, cultural, spiritual. Ecological, you know very well what that is. And people are trying to learn what works and what doesn't work and how can we share this with people. Generally, people start EcoVillages around the world because this is their motive, to learn and practice and share and inspire others to live more ecologically sustainably. So you've heard, put your money where your mouth is. When you live in an eco-village, or a place like Sangaya, which reminds me of one, it's sort of like put your lifestyle where your values are. Oh yeah, those are your values? Do you live like that? Can you? Want to? Economic sustainability is what you have to have if you're rural, so that you can afford to keep on living there, so that you don't have to jump into your car spewing carbon dioxide and using up chrome and gas and rubber and other materials to drive to town to make a living in town when you might as well move back to town because it's such a long drive. Why are you even living in an eco-village? So you got to find a way to make a living rurally if you're living rurally. So economic sustainability is how you can afford to keep living there after you've started it, because it's based on ecological values. Social, cultural, spiritual sustainability is why you enjoy living there and you want to keep living there, even if it's hard, even if it's the hardest thing you've ever done in your life, which it can be, right? Some of you know that. So why do you want to keep doing it? Well, there's a lot of joy in it. So the Global Eco-Village Network has had a variety of different definitions or descriptions of eco-villages over time. This is one of my favorites of theirs. A supportive social network and a low-impact, ecologically sustainable way of life. Here's our friend Robert. I took this photo back in 2000 and something. And here is his famous definition that came out in 1991 in the book EcoVillages and Sustainable Communities, which is a book that I read many, many times, underlined like crazy, practically inhaled and memorized because it was so influential to me. A human-scale full-featured settlement in which human activities are harmlessly integrated into the natural world and which supports healthy human development. And then he added in 1999, was it, Robert? He added, with multiple centers of initiative, not just one center like the community itself, but multiple centers of initiative, which can be successfully continued into the indefinite future. And I love this definition, and I don't know any eco-villages like that, so this is more of an aspiration and an affirmation. So many eco-villages, including mine, are aspiring to this, and little by little are achieving it. Do you see what I mean? My community, Earth Haven, is not at all harmless. We're just less harmful than we used to be, if you know what I mean. We are having healthy human development now, but in our beginning days we worked long, long hours and were exhausted and grumpy. So this can happen, and you probably know that. Okay, so there's basically 3 kinds according to the Global EcoVillage Network, again for short. Intentional communities, you probably knew that. Sustainability education centers, where a small staff lives there year-round and people come during the season when it's easier to live there, like maybe the warm season, and learn things and then go home. And traditional indigenous villages, where the people move back to the village or they choose not to live. They become more ecologically sustainable. They try to continue their culture, getting Western culture off their neck, and then they try to become more economically sustainable again, like they were in the olden days. There's a lot more than this worldwide, but this is a very cool map I got off the GEN website. But really there'd be quite a few more little green dots than this. Just to give you an impression and to make you think, whoa, it's worldwide. It sure is. Okay, ecovillages do a lot of different things. All ecovillages do not do all these things. Some ecovillages do one or more of these things. Some ecovillages do some of these things. Some ecovillages aspire to do some of these things. Some of them are still working to even get their first homes and their first roads and their first bridges, so they're not doing any of these yet. But I want to show you some ecovillages worldwide that are doing some of these things and the impact they're having in their region or their country or their whole continent. So here are some of the communities we're going to look at. So earth restoration is something that some ecovillages do very well. This is a community in Portugal called Tamera. The people who started it are German-speaking, and they are mostly from Germany. This is what the land looks like. It's arid and dry, and in the process of desertification, it used to be greener than this. Those are cork trees that are dying. They're oak trees, the cork oak, from which, the bark of which you make corks that are in your wine bottles. These are what some of their buildings look like. That's their annual olive harvest, and they've planted many, many trees. The 2 people with microphones are their founders. That's Dieter Doom at the top, and not Doom like Doomsday, but it's a German name, D-U-H-M. And Sabina Lichtenfels, the woman with the microphone, and they are the spiritual teachers and political thought leaders, you might say, of the place. And people who join Tamera join with the understanding that they are accepting them as their spiritual and political teachers, and they do. So it's a cohesive community because they're all of a piece about that. Okay, back to their land. It rains in the wintertime, and then it doesn't anymore the whole year long. And the rain has been diminishing over the years, and they were getting ever more like a desert. So they called a famous permaculture teacher from Austria named Sepp Holzer to come out there and help them. And he took a look at their land, and he took a look at the climate patterns, and he said, you don't have not enough water. You're just not catching it and storing it. You actually have enough water that if you caught it and stored it, you'd have enough for all year long, and you'd have enough water to put into boxcars full of water from here to Barcelona, which is a very nice image, don't you think? So I'm just thinking of our friend David Holmgren over here has one that says catch and store something. Anyway, it's the 3rd one. Obtaining yield, catch and store energy. Well, catch and store water too. Okay, so he said, here's what you do. You dig a bunch of lakes, and then you let them fill up with the winter rains. And you do things to the earth so that the water doesn't seep out of the bottom of the earth too fast. And it will slowly go down from the edges of the lake in the spring to the fall, when it'll be a very much smaller lake, and then it'll fill up again. And this will send water under the ground uphill. And this will regenerate your land with water in it. The water table and the water everywhere in the land will go up. And you need to dig really big lakes. And they said, oh my gosh, is this going to work? Can this happen? So they started digging lakes. They dug by hand, they dug with excavators and track hoes, and they took the digging thing, the bucket, and then they pounded the earth with it. Did you know you could take a bucket and pound? You can. And that was mashing the clay down so that it would be less permeable to the water running out. And then they said, is this going to work? So everybody, I want you to help me and help them by crossing your fingers. Please cross your fingers, and let's hope that when it rains the first winter that they actually fill up. What do you think? Did it fill up?
Yeah.
Wow.
Whoa, this is kind of dramatic, don't you think?
Yeah.
Boy, did it ever. They have, at the time that these pictures were taken, they had 4 lakes. I believe they have more now. The more lakes they have, the more they have water in the landscape where the lakes aren't. The cork trees began to come back to life, the ones that weren't entirely dead. Up the hill. Up the hill? Yeah, up the hill. And they have fish in one of them, but they don't catch them and eat them because they're vegans, but they do have fish. And they have a swimming pond as well. And, you can go boating on the lake. And this is a wonderful place where they have straw bales covered with fabric that they sit on and have shade cloth, and it's just like a cool coffee shop and tea shop. This would never work where it rains in the summertime, but it never rains in the summertime, so you can have straw bale furniture outside. And so this is to give you a picture of where the lakes are on their property, and also you get a sense of the edge, the fact that the edge is always changing. Where is the edge of the lakes? Well, it's changing every week. So what they do is they plant along the edge, and then they keep planting closer to the water line, which is receding, and the water has made the earth at the edge more fertile. So they're getting self-watering gardens because they're getting watered from underneath, and also they're more fertile land. So they have got some stacked functions here. They've got more water in the landscape. They have more garden area. It's pretty much self-watering and it's self-fertilizing. Okay, so that's what they have done for earth restoration. People from all over Portugal have come around to see how they've done it, and they've taught them what they did. And people from all over Spain, and from all over the Mediterranean, and from all over the world, where there's a need to catch water and store it because of climate change. And that's how one small eco-village is making a big difference. Shall we give them a rousing hand of applause? Hope they felt that over in Portugal. Okay, here's Auroville in India. This was started in 1968 by a spiritual teacher from France whose students called her the Mother. And she was a friend of Sri Aurobindo, an Indian philosopher and spiritual teacher. And she and he had the idea that if you created a gigantic settlement of many, many different villages for 50,000 people, and you had people from all over the world, from India, where this is located, and from all over the world, they would all get along well, and they would make an international place in order to demonstrate and learn and experience what they called human unity. And that's the purpose of it. And so that's the place. They've innovated their own mud brick architecture. Many, many, many villages in a large area of non-contiguously owned property. It's not one big round circle of property. It's lots of different pieces of property with the original villages of the Indian people. And this is in Tamil Nadu. So these are the Tamil people who speak the Tamil language. So they all know each other, and they travel all around by bicycle. Here's just some scenes from the international parts of this area. Okay, 1968, these folks from France arrived on the property that they were going to build on, that they had purchased. Dry as a desert. In fact, it was a desert. It had erosion cracks, dreadful earth with hardly any nutrients in it. It had formerly had feet of topsoil above what they were there in this bus in 1968. This had been a thriving, rich tropical jungle in the 1700s. And the British, who were colonizing India, and this is going to be a theme that you'll recognize, said, let's cut down these trees to build our bungalows that we British can live in the nearby town of Pondicherry, which got ever bigger because of all the Brits there. And let's use this wood for cooking fuel. We'll just cook our food with this wood. And let's build the British Navy. What, you build it out of ships? Well, in 1700s, that's what you built it out of. So the British Navy, the town of Pondicherry, and all those meals used up the forest completely. That forest was a jungle. It had tigers. It had elephants. This is what they found. Well, for God's sakes, the Grand Canyon has arose. Not arose, it descended. There wasn't a Grand Canyon there, and now, then there was from all the water running up. The monsoon rains would come, hit the slopes, because this was all sloping down to the Bay of Bengal, like that. And the monsoon rains would come and wipe off the topsoil, which would rush downhill to the Bay of Bengal and make the ocean water red from the fact that there was this color of soil. Year after year after year after year after year. And then they arrived. So what is a group of countercultural, visionary young people to do when they arrive in a place like this and they want to make it better and they're trying to make the world a better place? What do you suppose they do? Get naked and plant trees. Now this fellow is not really naked. As you can see, he is wearing a string. And his job is to plant sapling trees and to water them twice a day with a bowl of water that he carries from a long distance, twice a day. And to dig swales, and this was before the time of permaculture. Thank you, David. Before the time of permaculture, and they didn't have the word swales exactly, but they still knew that if they dug trenches in the earth, parallel to the slope, chances are it would catch water going downhill, which would sink it into the earth, and it would give more water table, and they wouldn't lose so much. So they did that. And these folks are hand watering their trees. They did it year after year after year after year. 1968 was a long time ago. So what do you suppose it looks like today?
My God, really?
Wow.
Jungle. So far, no tigers or elephants. The climate has changed a little bit in this small region of this state in India, which is the state, I think, of Tamil Nadu. It's a little bit more humid and a little more rain. From this to this. I don't really know that's the same road, but it's a cool set of photos, so I thought I'd show it to you. And are they still planting trees? You bet. They're still planting trees. Okay, now let's go to Colombia. Gaviotas is a company town in the eastern plains of Colombia. It's not an eco-village, not an eco-village, not an eco-village. That's what their founder says, and I'm here to tell you that I disagree. It walks and talks and quacks like an eco-village, so I'm going to call it an eco-village, but don't tell him I said so. So it was founded in 1971 there in the eastern plains of Colombia. And that is a picture of the bus on the muddy road breaking down multiple times in the 2-day travel time to get there. And who lived out there? See what it looks like? Red earth, grass, and trees only along the streams. There's not enough rain for many trees, and the soil is poor. Grass will tell you that the soil is poor. I mean, if there's grass there, it means, this is poor soil. And it's cloudy a lot, and there's not much wind, and there's not much you can do there except cattle ranching. And you have to have a whole lot of land for relatively little cattle because of the way it is. And so this was the worst land in Colombia, according to people who lived there. And according to this man, whose name is Paolo Lugari, who was one of the many intellectuals and well-connected, aristocratic, well-educated people in Bogota, who said, what can I do for my country? What can I do for the world situation? Let's find the worst land in Colombia and see if we can make it wonderful. And if we can do it there, anybody can. Well, at that time, the United Nations had funds for such things, and so did the Colombian government at that time. So He and the Colombian government money and the UN money moved out to this place. He purchased it with his own money, put it into a 501c3 type nonprofit in Colombia terms, and various inventors and scientists and physicists moved out there to create appropriate technology devices. That was their purpose. But they had to have places to live, so they created that community building, which they designed to be self-air conditioning. Can you see how? Shape of the roof.
Yeah.
Air comes in, rising up. They have a tunnel in the ground that leads to that building, and the tunnel starts much lower, and in the tunnel are lots and lots of aluminum rods that catch the heat and suck it into the aluminum rods so that the air, which is earth, which is air temperature, goes under the earth and gets cooler and cooler by the time it comes up in the bottom of the building and then goes out the roof. Well, that's the first thing they did, and then they decided to start inventing things. But here is a mural inside their community building for you to see the kind of village that they envisioned. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you yet about the appropriate technology devices because we're still in the section called Earth Restoration. They wondered if trees could grow there. Every rancher who lived there said, no, trees can't grow here. Believe me, we tried. And the Indian people who lived along the streams in those trees that you see back there, which is by a stream, said, trees will only grow here by the river. They won't grow out there in the plains. So they started experimenting with many, many different species of trees to see if any tree could grow. They tried many little seedlings and saplings, and finally they found that the Caribbean pine tree, also known as the Honduran pine, with its little rootlets dipped into a fungal mixture, would take hold and grow. First kind of tree they ever found that would. So they started planting them. And they decided they wanted to be shaded, so they invented this sort of reed mat seed planting tractor shading thing. And they would plant all day, and that's what happened.
Wow.
They planted an awful lot of trees. You see how they're in rows? It's a monoculture of Honduran pines. What do you suppose that did? Do you suppose it made the ground shadier and moister? Do you suppose it attracted more rain? Do you suppose it made the temperature get a little bit lower and the humidity a little higher? Just like around on the other side of our blue-green planet in India, this is what happened here. And then, 9 years later, the United Nations and the Colombian government didn't want to fund them anymore. So they didn't get any more money, and they thought, oh my gosh, what are we going to do to keep living here in our homes and keep doing the things we do? We have many projects we want to continue. And they decided that they must see if they had any kind of a resource they could turn into a business. Turns out the Honduran pine makes wonderful sap, which turns into turpentine, and the rosin that you can use for your violin, your cello, your bass, and your viola. Who knew? There's an international market for rosin, for bows, for stringed instruments, for orchestras. So they tapped into that market, and the market for turpentine, which I guess a lot of artists needed. And they made a factory, and they shipped this all over the place, and this was a business that they had. So it doesn't hurt the Honduran pine to tap them for the sap and the turpentine, kind of like maple syrup tapping, And they decided they needed more trees because they had to keep up with the demand for the violin bow rosin business. So they made a double reed mat tent over planting machine device, and then they could do twice as much. And then they decided to do child labor. Don't tell. And then they decided they would do it at night as well. So they just planted lots more trees, and they ended up with even more trees than they had before. And see that truck down there? It's a logging truck. They actually now have lumber. And this is what you can do if you plant millions over time of Colombian pines with little tiny rootlets dipped in fungus, which you have to know how to do. So they have a business, and they're doing fine, and what do you suppose happened? They began to notice something, that it had gone from this grassy plain to what you just saw, and there's all kind of other plants in there. Do you see all that not Honduran pines in there? Do you see the Amazon jungle plants in there? How did those Amazon jungle plants get up? Did they crawl up from the south? Theories that biologists had is that this area used to be a jungle. But for some reason, various climate change things that happened way before nowadays set it up so that it got drier. And when the jungle couldn't grow anymore because it wasn't enough water, the plants died off and the soil was so poor that only grass could grow. So guess what birds do? When they migrate, they need a place to land. Well, now they had some very cool Honduran pines to land on. Do you know what birds do when they take off from a branch? That's right, they do. It's one of those things that I hope I can say in a family slideshow like this. But yeah, they do. And so they're dropping little tiny self-contained excellent packets of nitrogen down on the ground filled with seeds from where they just were. And if they're flying north from the south, they're basically replanting the rainforest here in this part of Colombia. So between the fact that they were keeping their turpentine and violinbow rosin supplies up and these birds helping out the planet, they ended up with the Honduran pines serving as nurse plants with greater shade, greater humidity, and more rainfall. And now, you know what I'm going to say, don't you? The temperature is slightly cooler, and it's slightly more humid. This is what they did for their part of the planet. So I think we need to give a hand to Oroville and thank you for helping me thank them. I hope they heard that in India and Colombia. Okay, now we're going to go to appropriate technology. And this is me in 2011 staring upwards inside the greenhouse at Tamara, agog at what they had done. I'm thinking, God, I'm really here in Tamara, look at this. And then I got a picture and I put it on there to show you I was there. So let me tell you what they did at Tamara. But back to Gaviotas. Okay, this section is about appropriate technology. Now we're going back to Gaviotas. They wanted to create a windmill to pump water. Remember I said a bunch of inventors and scientists went there because they wanted to do appropriate technology devices. That's what they wanted to do. So they went there, and they needed to figure out how to harness the wind there on UN and, Bogota government money. We're going to try to design something that would help these ranchers. So they tried 65 iterations of a windmill to pump water. Why 65? Well, because the wind there goes like this. What are you going to do with that? It's not like a lot of wind like you see in these valleys filled with wind generators, So on the 66th iteration, they came up with this baby, which absolutely works and pumps the water up. And then they gave the plans for how to do it and a list of parts and where you could buy them to anybody who wanted them for free. And that wasn't just the ranchers there, that was people all over South America. So anybody that wanted these, they just gave away the plants. Then they thought, I wonder if we can make pumps that women and children could use that are hand pumps. Because as it was, they had hand pumps that were very, very hard to pump. And you needed one really strong, heavy guy, strong guy, or two guys to go. To try to pump the water up. And they wanted something that women and children could do. Well, that's impossible. They tried many iterations of it. Came up with something called the sleeve pump, which instead of moving a heavy metal pipe filled with heavy water up and down, you move a PVC plastic sleeve up and down over the water. And not only can children and women just go like this and pump the water up so easily, but you can make a children's seesaw.
Oh, wow.
And the seesaw action pumps the water up for the water tank for the school for the kids to splash in, and also they put it through filters and have drinking water.
Wow.
The other things they designed was solar collectors to boil water, because they had a free hospital for a while until the government said to have a hospital you must meet these regulations, which they could not meet. So they didn't have the hospital for long, but when they did, they had to sterilize instruments and they need boiling water. So they figured out how to harness through optics and heating water even with low sunlight because it was overcast a lot. And then they gave the plans away to anybody in Colombia that wanted them, and all over South America. Anybody that wanted them, they gave away the plans. Then they decided to cook food in the hospital, and for them, so they created these pots that were surrounded by coils of heated oil, and the heated oil came from it was either oil or, oil. Why oil? Because it'll hold heat more and longer than water will. If you ever have a burn from chicken soup bath, which I did once, it's way worse than a water burn. Anyway, it goes hotter is the point. And so that you can see how it works through convection. They make the water hotter up on the roof, in the panels, even with low sunlight. Gets hot enough to be boiling, it gets in a water tank, and through convection it just goes through the whole system. What do you suppose they did with the plans? Gave them away, exactly. Okay, now we're going back to Tamara, where they wanted to do appropriate technology things too. And this is Jürgen Kleinwachter, who is a German scientist, inventor, and physicist and philanthropist, who wants to help the world be a better place. And he is interested in helping women in third world countries, and especially in Africa and other places where it's very sunny but there's not much water and there's not much cooking fuel. He wanted to help their lives. So he said, I wonder where there's a place that it's really sunny and hot and dry that I could use as a kind of a test model. And Tamara said, Tamara said, come here, do it here. So he did. So first thing he did was to create this greenhouse, which has the sunlight there go through the plastic on through Fresnel lenses. Fresnel, Fresnel lenses, which is an optical system, low-tech thing without moving parts that causes light to get magnified. The light getting magnified made it hotter, and it would go onto pipes with mirrors behind them to reflect the light that was already pretty hot back up to it to heat up the oil in these pipes. Now you know what they're going to do with these pipes, don't you? Because you've just seen it. There they are cooking with it. It goes into that insulated tank, then it goes all around those cooking pots, and that's how they can use simple sunlight that's not solar powered to cook food. They take the heat that's left over and they send it to a Stirling engine, and they use the differential between another kind of liquid and the other piston. And the differential of the heat from the heated up oil that's lukewarm by now but still warm, and the room temperature oil or water makes this piston go around, which would create a little bit of electricity. And they also made a Scheffler mirror. It's a parabolic arc made of a bunch of little pieces of mirror that they glued on the right shape, that they grabbed a hold of the sun and shone it through the side of the kitchen into that insulated foil-covered oven. And there's our guide holding a piece of twig in front of it, and it caught fire, so they pull her hand back, just to show that you could cook, soup and baked bread and so on in such an oven. After you get it hot in there, you shut the insulated doors, of course, and you have to turn the mirror so it's not setting the building on fire. And so that's a little bit of the appropriate technology devices that we saw at Tamara. They also created a water pumping device, which is another kind of Stirling engine. And this one is just catching the sun and creating a heat differential because of the sunlight heating up the water because of this parabolic arch. So they give or sell, I am not sure, these plans away to people all over the Mediterranean who want to know the same. So they used their place to help Jürgen Kleinwachter do his experiments and help people, and that's yet another way that Tamara is helping folks worldwide. This is them having one of their rituals at sunrise, or sunset, I think. Okay, this is Eben Linden in Germany, and what they did was to help the entire country of Germany shift from having straw bale buildings being illegal to having straw bale buildings be legal. So they're in the former East Germany. They're large and big and old, and they have different, 22 or 25 years old. They have different neighborhoods that various groups of them build with their own neighborhood culture. They have a seminar business in this big building, which was the original two-story L-shaped farmhouse. And they renovated it, and they have webinars there. And not webinars, but seminars. The community owns the business, but not everybody in the community works for it. It's not an income-sharing community. Many people there work in their own businesses, but some of the people who live in the community work for the community's business and get a small salary.
What type of seminars?
What?
What type of seminars?
Straw bale, EcoVillage design, and permaculture, and dismantling corporate right-wing culture, or other leftist kind of hippie things. We would all love it if we spoke German. They do courses in English too. Okay, so they made the largest straw bale building in Europe, 3 stories, at least at that time the largest, and they lobbied to help the German government know it's not going to burn, it's not going to fall down, bugs can't eat it. And so finally, a straw bale building became legal in Germany because of the activism of this one small eco-village.
Wow.
Okay, let's go to Denmark. This is Svanholm. I'll give you 6 hugs and a piece of chocolate if you can tell me what Svanholm means in Danish. It means swan home. Did you know that English has a whole lot of Danish words? It has to do with what happened in the 700s and 800s in Europe. In England. Okay. So they bought this farmstead with a giant mansion and various other great big buildings back in the 60s, and they began to. That's a Stirling engine, another kind. They got it recently, not in the 60s. But anyway, they began to do organic farming and gardening. So they raise sheep, they have orchards, they have a greenhouse, they do lots and lots of organic food. And they were introducing the idea of organic produce and organic food to the whole country of Denmark. Because the Danes were eating commercial food because they didn't know different back in the 60s, and neither did we. And they also have a dairy herd of 100 cows, so they were introducing the idea of organic milk that doesn't have hormones and bad stuff in the milk of the feed or the cows. And they basically transformed the culture of Denmark from a place that knew nothing about organic food to a place who had a market for it, and they are still doing this today. And that's how Svanholm helped to transform a piece of their country, of Denmark. If we cross the ocean to a whole other culture on the other side of the world, here in Japan, Konohana family did the same with their country, Japan. So here's where they are, on the slopes of Mount Fuji. There's Mount Fuji and there's their land. Mount Fuji is the kind of mountain that doesn't just, go like this. It goes like this, all the way to the ocean. And wherever you are on the side of it, you can look that way, you can look up at it, and they're on the side of it, and so that's why it looks like that. And here they are. There are more members than this at this time. This is when I was there. And their total, almost sole business is growing and raising organic food. And generating happiness from excellent nutrition and good health and lots of fermented foods. And working really hard, long hours. And having long, long meetings every single night to process whatever happened in the day before they go to bed. And then to get up bright and early in the morning and go out and farm and never have a day off at all, ever the whole year long, except for one day. And I, who'm a visitor there, said, well, how come you don't ever have a day off? Says I, the ignorant Westerner who's trying not to be an ugly American. And they said, well, nature never takes a day off. And I said, oh, right. And on their day off, this is what they do. They put down all their farm equipment. They tell the plants, we'll be back. And they get up, let me see how they do this. Oh, they leave at 6 o'clock at night. They hike up Mount Fuji all night long. They arrive at the top at about 10 in the morning. They do rituals to Konohana, the Japanese goddess of Mount Fuji. Their name is Konohana family, Konohana. And then they hike back down. Take a fudo bath, go to bed, get up and farm. So they have these meetings that start right after dinner, starting off with the children's meeting where the children tell everybody what they did in school that day. Everybody gives them advice and thanks them and claps and asks them questions. And then they all gather in little circles around the floor and they do farm-type work with their hands, like breaking apart garlic pieces or picking rocks out of the millet or something like that, while they talk about whatever has happened in a kind of a random way from sacred to mundane, you know. And so I was a visitor there, and I was like, somebody was translating for me in my ear each thing they were talking about. Somebody would say, when you said that to me the other day, I didn't like how you talked to me that. Actually, it would be the same day. When you talked to me that way this morning, I didn't like how you talked to me. And I want to tell you that I think we should clear this up right now with, you know, all 70 of us. And the other person said, yeah, okay, and then they did. And then somebody else had a topic which said, you know when the children sing the duck and chicken song with the quack, quack, and the click, click? The cluck, cluck, and the quack. I think we should have more clucks and less quacks. Okay, so they made that decision, and they make their decisions by just kind of generally informally agreeing. And this went on for hours and hours, and I'm sitting there, you know, I'm a governance nerd, you know, I'm going. So somebody says to me, I would like to ask our guest, Diana from Earth Haven across the ocean, what kind of meetings do you have? How often do you have meetings? So I told how often we had them. And she said, with so few meetings and so short, how do you ever trust each other? Well, you know, I have something to say about everything, but I was totally speechless. I couldn't think of what to say, and I just said, well, we do the best we can, you know. And so their view was, the more intimacy, connection, and emotional processing you have, including every single day of the year except that one, then the more you will trust each other. And that's one way to do it. And I had to say, you know, I think I know stuff about communities, but I can always learn something radically new and different from another culture. So it was really fun to learn that. And then I went back home and kissed the ground because I don't want to go to lots of meetings like that. But this is one of my 6 favorite communities in the world. Okay, they own their own homes that they build so that they can share the homes. Everybody has a room with 1 or 2 roommates. And I said, well, don't you want some privacy? I mean, you're going to be in the same room with some other people. See, what do I know about Japanese culture? And they said, well, we don't want people to be lonely. And then I said, gosh, if I lived there, I'd want to have some privacy. And they said, oh, well, we've got a room for lovers. You just sign up on the door and you put the hours you're going to be there. And then you go in, you know, and you're with your lover, and then you come out, and then the next person is waiting outside the door. And I said, oh, I meant, you know, just for me. I would just sign up every day and go in there and be by myself at last. You know? No lover, just me going, oh gosh, let me just read a book or do any old thing. And then I'd come out and work real hard again all day. So I was really having a good time learning a whole different culture. Their land is not contiguous, and they only own the land that their buildings are on. All the rest of the land is loaned to them for free by their neighbors, because in Japanese culture, you would never sell your ancestral land. So they can't buy the land there. They can only farm it with the goodwill of their neighbors, which they have pretty goodwill. So they make every single kind of food they eat. And I don't know if you know about Japanese meals, but you have 10 different courses, 3 times a day. But they only eat 2 times a day to give their digestion a rest. They have lunch and they have dinner. They don't have breakfast. So you have 16 hours of letting your intestines rest. Anyway, they only buy sugar, salt, and oil. They make their own traditional fermented Japanese foods. Growing food and raising food, they're vegetarians, is their main and practically only business. They make lots and lots of box lunches, which they sell. They make lots and lots of raw organic food products that they sell all over Japan and value-added products. They raise chickens for the eggs. They raise goats for the milk, and they have bees. What we eat is not food, it's life. And they have transformed their country of Japan into a country that now understands the need for and makes a market for health food. And that's Konohana family in Japan. So that's the slideshow. Thank you for watching.
Wow.